Welcome all you wiretappers out there. Back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I have on the Zoom a couple of guests. Our regular guest, Camillus Cam Robinson from Chicago area. Cam, I can never remember the name of that town that you live in. I have to apologize.
No, it's Munster, the first town right across. I work in the Loop, but as people around here will tell you, I ain't from Chicago.
You drive in.
They will remind you.
I bet that's a fun drive every day. Anyhow, and you hear laughing in the background, Paul Whitcombe. Now, Paul is an attorney up in Illinois. He served as a law clerk and saw some pretty interesting outfit trials, as he's going to tell us a little bit about today. He's involved, and so is Cam, involved with the Killers, Kings, and Clowns Facebook pages and a YouTube channel with a man named John Toohey. And they interviewed a lot of mob people up there, especially on their YouTube channel. And they've got a whole bunch of different Killers, Kings, and Clowns Facebook interest pages, all kinds of different, New York mob, Five Families, Chicago outfit, and I can't remember them all. Just go to your Facebook and search for Killers, Kings, and Clowns, wouldn't you say, Cam?
Right. Yeah, we tried to cover geographically every area. So not if you like Rhode Island, if you like New England, you got that area covered. We're trying to spread it out, get everybody's interests blanketed there. So
okay,
we've got a lot of information, a lot of photos for everybody, covering all our bases.
Hey Cam, that thing that I said before about when you talk, there's like, and you did something.
Hold on one second. Hold on. I know what it is. I think it's the fan on this thing. Hold on.
There it is, big time there.
Still going on. All right.
There it is.
Hold on. I'm trying to move this thing away from.
It's like water's running or something almost.
I think it's the fan on the computer. Is that what about that? Is that better?
Yeah.
That's better?
Yeah, that's better. I don't hear it now.
Yeah, okay.
And folks, our other guest, Paul Whitcombe. Paul was a clerk in a federal court in his younger days as an attorney, and he happened to see the Lenny Patrick trial. Lenny Patrick is an outfit guy who ended up turning on Gus Alex and Sam Carlisi in a case, I believe was the Rincon Indian tribe or Indian casino case, I believe. Is that right, Paul?
That's actually the three different cases. Rincon was in San Diego, and that was Sam Carlisi and John DeFranzo and Don Angelini and some other big names. Then Gus Alex and Sam Carlisi were Patrick's cases.
Okay, and that was a Chicago case then?
Yes, they sure
Chicago
were.
area case. So he was a witness to that, and he learned a whole lot about Lenny Patrick, and he is a mob historian with a particular emphasis on the Chicago area and the outfit. So welcome, Paul and Cam, of course.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Cam, why don't you get us going? Let's go back and let people learn a little bit about Lenny Patrick. He's not exactly a household name. He's not exactly Al Capone, in which we've had about 10 different books written on.
Right.
And I don't know how many podcasts done on. I've done about 4 or 5 on something around Capone myself.
I think the main thing working against Patrick, as far as people not knowing about him, is that his name doesn't end in a vowel. I think if there's a lot of hang up about when they talk about Chicago and the family secrets, everybody says, well, a made guy never rolled over in Chicago. Well, I think if you look at the hierarchy of things, who was higher ranked, a guy like Nick Calabrese or Lenny Patrick, say Lenny Patrick was much higher in the inner circles. He was dealing in much higher power circles than a guy like Nick Calabrese. He got his start. He was a young guy in around 1912 or so. He was born. By 15, he dropped out of school. He was robbing banks, which was the thing to do in the early 30s. And he got arrested. He did about 8 years in prison. He comes out in the 40s, and he was a Jewish guy. So in the Jewish neighborhoods, he started, he learned early on about gambling and So he started gambling and bookmaking. He was setting odds like a lot of the young Jewish gamblers. And he got in tight on the west side with a lot of the gangsters there. He met Giancana pretty young, right? And Milwaukee Phil, Aldericio, all that west side crowd. And he made really good connections really young. I mean, from the 40s, this guy was getting tied in with who was even then the upper echelon of the outfit. So in the 40s, this guy is meeting the top of the pops in the outfit, and he's building up his own gambling crew. At some point, like he kills a couple of bookmakers who become competition. 3 or 4 different other Jewish bookmakers step up, and Lenny Patrick has no problems with taking out the competition throughout the 50s until he becomes the top guy. At some point, the Jewish population migrates farther up north. Patrick gets permission from his overseers, and he then moves up north. And he has good connections too with Gus Alex, who I think Gussie Alex was right under a guy named Murray Humphreys, and he was the political arm of the outfit. During the 70s, when everybody talks about Joey Iappa or Tony Accardo, I think people forget that it was a triumvirate ruling the outfit. It was Accardo, Iappa, and Gus Alex those are the top 3. Gus Alex was no less important because he controlled all the politics, not only in Chicago, but nationwide. So
now Gus Alex,
yeah.
was he Greek?
He was a Greek guy, yes.
Right. I noticed that here in Kansas City, there were a couple of Greek guys that were kind of close associates. They never seemed to have quite that important a place, but in the hierarchy. But Chicago is a much more diverse city than Kansas City, anyhow, with those different ethnic backgrounds from around the Mediterranean, as well as Poland, and just real honeypot. I think a drawing card for ethnic background, a melting pot. There we go, melting pot. Good.
It's one of those words.
It's always amazed me, much more so than Kansas City. We're so western out here, and not a lot of that kind of. We only got one real old ethnic neighborhood, and that's Italian.
Right.
We don't really even have a Jewish neighborhood particularly anymore, and never did have much of one. But so he was really big into politics, and he had all the connections.
Gus Alex,
downtown with the Counselor's Row down there. Did he get involved in that with the Operation Grey Lord? Was he still around then?
Paul, go ahead. You know a little bit more about
Gussie Alex, just like Lenny Patrick, he started out as what they called then a torpedo, killed people for the mob, and grew to she was sure around in the Counselor Row days, but he avoided that Operation Grey Lord. He avoided indictment. Gus Alex, born Gustav Alexis, was probably the number 2 man in the Chicago mob about 1972. Wanted to retire, but they had such a shortage of capable leaders that they couldn't let him go. So he was very, very important in the mob, and probably the most important non-Italian nationwide that I can think of.
Country,
You cannot run a successful organized crime family in a big city without having that political connection. It isn't not going to work at all. You got to have that political fixer in there, help people get contracts, and they have some kind of businesses, and help people connect with the court system with the right people, as well as licensing with the city and city inspectors, and Chicago had that stuff wired, and all the other big cities pretty well had it wired. They had it wired here until in the 60s, really.
There was something to be said for his just in an operating capacity, his smarts too. You look at the dearth of leadership, like Paul said, in the 70s, what led to Iappa coming into power, and we sort of kicked this topic around amongst ourselves, but Iappa was never seen as really the heir apparent. He just sort of was the last guy standing, but they needed a guy like Alex who was as smart as he was, because Accardo wanted to stay in the background, and Alex did too, but one of those two had to be present and let Iappa run the street stuff. He was he was the muscle guy. He had a big, strong crew, and he would sort of run the day-to-day. But you needed to have somebody with those smarts like Gussie Alex who could really handle. He was a really intelligent, really capable guy. So he did your politics, but he also dealt with a lot of interrelations with things. He didn't. I mean, he was capable of laying the hammer down, but maybe not to the extent wasn't as heavy-handed maybe as Iappa was on a day-to-day basis. I think he was a much more capable, much more intelligent individual.
So by the 60s, your boy Lenny Patrick is making a lot of money. I see from your notes here from his sports book. He seemed to really gravitate to that sports book. He must have had a bunch of subagents working for him too. And he had all the Jewish gambling too, is what I understood you saying.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, I see that he bet some big winners in the Super Bowl in the Super Bowl of 1969. The Jets beat the Colts. That was, God, if you'd have picked that, would have had a lot of money on it. You could have made some money. Now, normally these mob guys don't gamble. They like to just balance the books. He must have liked to gamble a little bit too.
I think he just, yeah, go ahead, Paul. You know better than I.
Well, in Chicago, you had the upper echelon of the mob. They were hardcore gamblers. Tony Accardo said if he died at the gambling table, he'd die a happy man. They were very serious players, loved to gamble. I happen to own some pages from Sam Giancana's betting diary, but he kept records every day of his ins and outs and in his own handwriting. So it was not uncommon for these guys to be real serious players, even though you would think they wouldn't be sampling the merchandise. They did. And they did fairly well. Of course, when you know which horse is going to come in first, it's pretty easy to win.
That was always Frank Rosenthal's value to the outfit up there. He was a hell of a handicapper, and he was always giving them winners, whether it be horses or sports events.
He was. And the funny thing is, Rosenthal's the most famous handicapper out of Chicago, but he really learned his trade from someone called Donald the Wizard of Odds Angelini, who was a genuine sports handicapping genius. Very quiet guy, gentle guy, but very much a made member of the outfit that made them millions and millions of dollars. And that's where Lefty learned to learn his craft as well. Interesting.
I didn't know that. So by the 80s, go up through the 60s, he's making a lot of money. Oh, this is an interesting thing. You know any more about this? That Lenny and his partner Dave Yaris extorted $300,000 from Alan Dorfman. That is how'd that come down?
Oh, sure. They did this to a lot of places, car dealerships, pizza parlors. They would simply say, listen, you want to keep in business, you're going to pay us this amount of money. And this would come out in later years in the Gus Alex trial, the Carlisi trial. That they would make a threat to firebomb the place, or you're going to have an accident, put a bomb underneath someone's car, not meant to kill him, but meant to scare him. And that's how they made a lot of money. Lenny Patrick was not just a sports book guy. He admitted to killing 7 people. So there are at least 7 that we know of. And by the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, Lenny Patrick was a capo in the Chicago mob in all but name.
Right.
Wasn't Italian, so they wouldn't give him the name. But Chicago operates a little differently than we realize. It's decentralized. It's one family, but each street crew operates almost like its own family. And the capos of these street crews have enormous power and discretion. And Lenny Patrick was one of those 5 or 6 guys that ran the day-to-day operations of the Chicago mob. He was really up there.
So that murder attempt on Alan Dorfman several years before he was actually murdered, that was probably this Lenny Patrick's extortion attempt to make it look like somebody was about to get him.
Sure sounds like it.
I always wondered what the deal was like that, because it was such a big moneymaker for him. They must have gotten together and said, we can get some money off this dude. I'm sure he had to share it. And I know we had a guy in Kansas City put a bomb. It wasn't extended to really hurt anybody, but he put a bomb in a guy's car, or he had 2 guys do it. And then he goes back around. He said, I know those boys that did that. They're mad at you, but I can calm them down. I can take care of this. We can work something out. And of course, the guy paid him like $5,000, and he told the guys that he had sent over there with the bomb to do it. So that's probably what happened with Dorfman.
Well, and that's what happened with a lot of Lenny Patrick's victims, like Ray Hare, the car dealer. They'd go in there and demand $300,000, And then Lenny Patrick would come in and say, hey, I heard you got troubles from so-and-so. I can iron it out. I'll go to him. Listen, the best I can do for you is I got to cut down to 125. That's all I can do to save you and your family. And that's how they get the 125. And of course, Lenny sent the first guy in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. It's a cold, cruel world.
And, you know, as Paul said with that decentralization, I mean, it could be, you know, Dorfman was under guys like Lombardo. A guy like Lenny is running his own crew. It wouldn't be unheard of for them to just kidnap him, you know, for them to be operating so independently. They just grab him, and they're not going to hurt him per se, but Lombardo's guys weren't watching. They're like, all right, just pay him. They know he's not going to get hurt. Just give him some money. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's all going to the same place.
Yeah.
You know, just
Right,
one
and he
crew
had to
striking
kick up
against
there.
another.
Yeah, and Lenny's kicking upstairs to Gussie Alex. Gussie
Mhm.
Alex is kicking upstairs to Iupa and Accardo. So just like Camillus said, it all goes the same way.
Yeah, really. And if Lombardo complains because his man Dorfman got hurt a little bit or got some money taken from him, then Iupa just tells Lombardo, hey, you know, don't worry about it.
Should have been watching him better.
Yeah, don't worry about it. And he's going to say, okay, I
I
understand.
guess your security's no good.
Forget about it.
Forget about it. There we go. Forget about it. Not often you get a chance to use that, is there?
Not very often.
That was perfect. So Cam, tell us a little more about
Well,
Lenny Patrick. He's working with Gus Alex now and by
I
the
think
80s.
like Paul said, yeah, and I think this is where we're getting into Paul's territory, but I think it really needs to be stressed that in Chicago, like he said, like Paul said, you can't get that capo term, but it really, you can, just like with Gussie Alex, you can be extremely high ranked and not be Italian. It really, with the exception being called a capo, there's no real difference between, I mean, I guess there is between Italian members and non-Italian members, but the upper echelon, the leadership was Gussie Alex, who was not an Italian. Before that, there was Curly Humphreys, who was Welsh. And I mean, you can't find anybody who was higher ranked than he was, except a guy like Rica or Ricardo.
Yeah.
So Lenny Patrick being Jewish really wouldn't curtail his ability to be as high up as he was. So what we see here, and I'll kick it to Paul, but one thing we really need to stress is that Lenny Patrick wasn't just some Jewish bookmaker who knew a few guys and he rolled on the mob. Lenny Patrick was, as Paul said, he was a capo who happened to be Jewish. Wasn't, you know, like Paul said, he wasn't called a capo, but he had all the bells and whistles, all the frills of being a capo for 30 years and had 60 years experience in the outfit. And this is the information he had at his disposal.
It's kind of interesting. He even threatened his own brother for money that his brother owed him, his brother Mike. It says here, your notes here, Cam says Patrick started threatening Mike's son-in-law, Lenny's niece's husband. I mean,
Was that what it was, Paul? I was trying to follow the story
This guy
about
was
what he
cold.
did to his family. He was just awful things. It was.
Yeah, there was not a good relationship there. Those things did happen. And when Lenny Patrick started testifying, or there was rumor that he was, the outfit made a big mistake by planting a bomb under his daughter's BMW.
Oh,
Thinking that would intimidate Lenny. Lenny didn't give a damn about his daughter. They didn't speak, hadn't spoken for years.
God.
So
man.
now that was something that you wouldn't expect. Carter was so old and in ill health by that time that you would not be surprised to see that. But Accardo would not have approved of intimidating a family member like that.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I've never seen it. I've never really heard of it before. That's quite amazing. Sounds like something Mad Sam DiStefano would do. He would,
Right.
you know, they claimed that he killed his own brother. He and his other brother killed the third brother who was a dope addict. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and then the first brother killed Mad Sam.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He
The
did.
brother-
He and Tony
yeah.
Splatro was the ones that killed Mad
Yeah.
Sam in the end.
Sam
Sam-
killed his brother, and the other brother killed.
They put the dis in dysfunctional families, don't they?
Ooh. Yeah, those DiStefanos had some problems.
Oh boy.
Let's go to family therapy to the Destafanos. Or Lenny Patrick.
That's right.
Make Murray Povich look civilized.
Right.
Yeah, really. Yeah, Jerry Springer.
Yeah,
Jerry
yeah.
Springer time here, dude.
Yeah.
Jerry Springer with real guns.
Yes, real thing.
Stefano had a problem with his wife. He brought a guy home and forced him to have sex with her at gunpoint.
Yeah, yeah.
He was not good at relationships.
That story so far out there, I have trouble believing that, but they say it happened.
Yeah, well, I believe there's a police report on it because
Is
the guy
there
was
really?
sure he was going to get arrested for rape.
Oh, but darn. Well, I figured there must be some basis in some kind of a document somewhere because I've seen it so many different places.
Yeah,
More
yeah.
than just talk.
Pretty sure that's legit.
What was the lead? What was the lead up to his arrest and everything, Paul? How did they?
Well, it goes back a ways to about 1986 when Joey Ayupa, who was the boss of the outfit, went to prison. And in his place was a little known, seldom mentioned mafia boss by the name of Sam Wings Carlisi. You didn't see anything about Carlisi in the paper. They didn't even, as late as 1983, the press didn't even have a picture of the guy. But he had been Ayupa's driver and bodyguard for years and had learned the trade, and Ayupa anointed him as the boss of the mob. The press was chasing Joe Ferriola around and didn't know what Carlisi was doing. But Carlisi was running things, and he got a little concerned about somebody by the name of Jeeps Didino, an elderly mobster. They were afraid that Jeeps was going to flip, which Jeeps was not going to do and had not done. But Carlisi was caught saying, well, if that Jeeps flips, a lot of people are going to get hurt, including me. So Carlisi gave the word to kill Jeeps Didino. And that was passed down to Gus Alex, passed down to Lenny Patrick. Lenny Patrick passed it down to Mario Ranone, who's been in the press recently because he was released on a compassionate release from prison for COVID. Ranone he was supposed to go and open the door to Didino's apartment and start this process of knocking him down. But when he's there, he noticed a couple other outfit hitters are following him.
Ooh.
He gets spooked and he thinks he might be also the target of the hit. So he runs to the FBI. Ranone then flips. He later unflips. He was famous for this flipping and unflipping type of thing. Well, that leads to catching Lenny Patrick on a wire, and Lenny Patrick gets caught and is brought in. At the time, he's in his late 70s. Very powerful in the Chicago mob. Reports directly to Gus Alex, who's right at the top. He reports directly to Sam Carlisi. And so Lenny Patrick wears a wire on Gus Alex and gets him to talk about payoffs and extortions. Ray Hara Nissan was one of them. We mentioned it earlier. Pizza parlors, real estate, Cacciatore real estate, grocery stores. He gets all this on a wire with Gussie Alex. And Gussie Alex gets picked up and is indicted. And he had not, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong about this, Camillus, I don't think Gussie had ever been prosecuted before for anything serious.
No, they didn't even have mug shots of him. That's that famous mug shot that Romer had was because he happened to be in L.A. The L.A. cops couldn't find any pictures of him, so they had a 20-year-old parking ticket on him, and they decided to arrest him on it just so they could have a photo for the mob books out there. They broke into his mother-in-law's home. Basically, they got a warrant, stormed into the house just to get photos of him because none existed.
Yeah.
So they had nothing on him.
That's how elusive this guy was. But it was a major arrest for the Chicago outfit. Since the days when they got Ayupa, they didn't get anybody that was this high up until they got Gussie Alex. Now, he bonded out. he was allowed to return to his Lakeshore Drive condo. I posted a photo on Kings, Killers, and Clowns yesterday of Gussie Alex leaving the MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, with Carl Walsh, his lawyer, who, by the way, he shared with Tony Accardo, very successful outfit lawyer. And he was facing serious RICO charges, was sent to trial in front of, oh gosh, I can't think of the judge's name right now. It escapes me, but luckily for me, I happened to be clerking for another judge at the time of this trial. And so I got to sit and watch it next to Antoinette Giancana, the mafia princess.
Oh my
she
God.
came to the trial, sat through
She
the
sure
trial.
did,
this
along
day?
with lots of other interested
Wow.
parties.
They do that. I had to testify once, and half the family was there when I walked up to testify against one of the mob boss's brother, actually, Tony Ripesabella. It's kind of intimidating, actually. They all stared at you in and out.
Oh yeah, well, Antoinette she was a colorful person, not exactly, well, she talked like a sailor, and she had a lot of things to say about Lenny Patrick. I'll tell you, it was really interesting commentary.
Interesting is probably a diplomatic word.
Yeah, it would be like sitting next to Castro at JFK's funeral. Not a good thing.
So what they're trying Gus Alex based on what Lenny Patrick on his testimony. Was this a RICO
Sure was.
trial?
Oh,
Extortion.
For just a variety of things, racketeering, extortion, murder.
mhm.
Yes, yes, absolutely right. And Gus Alex was, you know how these RICO prosecutions work, Gary. The federal government spent years getting wiretaps, nailing down witnesses, prepping Lenny Patrick in secret. And by the time it got to trial, of course, Gus Alex put on the old sickly old man act.
Yeah.
And came shuffling into the courtroom every day with his half glasses on and his cane. And he was very friendly to me, always spoke, was always friendly. Even though I was a nobody in that courtroom, I was working in another courtroom. And he handled it with a lot of dignity. I give him credit. He treated everybody with courtesy. His defense, of course, was that he was retired and he hadn't done any of these things, and Lenny Patrick couldn't be believed. Lenny Patrick admitted on the stand to the commission of 7 murders, mistakenly believing he had been granted immunity. Now, how you make that mistake, I have no idea.
Yeah, usually if those feds, you make a proffer, and then you get some kind of piece of paper that tells that, as long as you are totally cooperative with them, then you will not be prosecuted. But it's written down on a piece of paper. It's like a contract almost. So he must not have had that.
Those guys are so damn sharp about that too.
Oh, yeah. Lenny, I don't know who his lawyer was, never saw a lawyer for Lenny. I think he was so desperate to see that he did not spend the rest of his life in jail. And that played in the Carlisi trial later as well. He was willing to say anything just to salvage the possibility that he wouldn't go to jail for the rest of his life.
Was that his motivating factor? Was just to stay out of jail? Is that why he flipped to begin with, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you see like
As an old man didn't want to.
Yeah, I don't think it was a Frank Collada situation where they said, "Hey, Lenny, someone's out to kill you. There's a contract on your life. We'll protect you." But I don't think it was that. I think it was he desperately wanted to get out. By the time I met him in the Carlisi trial, he was 78 years old.
Yeah.
He really had no future if he didn't cooperate with the feds. Gussie Alex was, of course, convicted and sent to federal prison along with Nick Gio and some others, and Gussie never made it out.
So
that trial would have been 91, 92, the Gus Alex. And then
Yes.
he was originally, Jeeps was picked up in 86. Just speaking to how long those RICO trials take to build. Jeeps was 86 or 87, and that trial was in 92. So yeah, they take a long time. I mean, for the entire investigation, of course, Patrick would have been picked up in 89 or so, 88. But yeah, the entire investigation, those, like you said, those RICO trials take years to build. That's why they don't lose, as you and I were talking about once before.
Right. It's a very difficult thing to defend against.
So he also testified against this Sam Wings Carlisi that nobody really ever heard of unless you're really, a student of the Chicago outfit. What was it? Was he like, what was his position with Gus Alex? Was he like Gus Alex's underboss or a member of his crew, or what was their relationship?
Carlisi was the boss of the outfit.
Oh, at this point in time, he was the boss.
Yeah, he was.
As soon as IEPA went away.
Oh, I forgot. IUPA was just gone away.
IEPA was gone.
Okay, all right. I stand corrected on that.
Carlisi was the boss, and Gus Alex reported directly to Carlisi. But Carlisi was such a stealth guy. There's a famous surveillance photograph of Gus Alex that was taken and used by the federal government, and it was identified as Gus Alex meeting with unknown man. Well, that was Sam Carlisi.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as soon as I saw the photograph, of course, I knew it was Sam Carlisi, but I had a reason to know. And a lot of people didn't. The guy was just incredible at keeping a low profile.
So would Lenny Patrick, had he worn a wire on Alex? And
Yes.
So they had some good audio tape to play for the jury.
Yeah. And then now they didn't have that with Carlisi, but that was a more traditional RICO mafia trial where he was the boss and he was being charged with heading up a street crew that committed acts of extortion, bombings, intimidation, things of that nature.
So
Jimmy Marcello was his underboss.
Yeah, little Jimmy Marcello.
Little Jimmy Marcello was right under Sam Carlisi.
So they had some predicate acts of extortion and murder too.
They really did, and one of them, some of them were a comedy of errors. You think of the mob, and you think of these efficient killing machines, but these guys really weren't that. For example, the Oak Street Theater, they wanted extortion money. They wanted control of the theater. They wanted their people put into the projectionist union positions. The Oak Street Theater wasn't cooperating. So Carlisi gave the order to Patrick to firebomb the place. So Patrick goes out, throws a Molotov cocktail on the roof. It goes out. No fire. So they come back and they throw up some dynamite and blasting caps. It's a dud. Nothing happens. But they tried a third time. Never did get a decent fire out of the Oak Street Theater, but they did get a few years in federal prison out of it. So it was like the gang that couldn't shoot straight.
Really? So Patrick, the fans out there, for the people out there, so Patrick, he commits this crime and he does it at the behest of Gus Alex, who has been told by Sam Carlisi to do this.
Yes.
And it's to get this money that will go then back up through the chain from Gus Alex back up to Sam Carlisi. And did they have anybody else that kind of testify as to the hierarchy and how this worked? That if this happened, that Carlisi would end up with the money, and if something like this happened, then Carlisi had to be, even though they may not have him on a tape ordering it, they may not have a witness saying he ordered it. But you got somebody who can say, yeah, if this happened, then he ordered it and he would get some of that money. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, that's how it worked. And there are photographs of the meetings of the various different, there's a famous photograph of Carlisi, Marcello, Rocco Infelice, and Joe Ferriola all meeting in the Addison Venture Store parking lot the day after Tony Spilatro's body was found. Things like that. But it's funny you would ask about how they knew Carlisi was involved, because there was a motion in limine, and you know what that is, Gary, but for your listeners, in advance, the defense lawyers asked the judge to rule that we couldn't use the name mob or outfit or mafia.
That's a pretty common.
Yeah, it's prejudicial. And we're not trying anybody because they're involved in the outfit. This was strictly this Carlisi street crew. And Lenny Patrick knew about this and was instructed very carefully not to use those terms. But he knew that he also had to get a conviction here. He was spending the rest of his life in prison. So one of the assistant U.S. attorneys asked Lenny Patrick while he was testifying, now, Mr. Patrick, just because Sam Carlisi told you to do something, why would you go and throw a bomb just because Carlisi told you to? And every defense lawyer started to jump up at the same time, but before a single one of them, and he was quick for a 78-year-old man,
Yeah.
grabbed the microphone and held it to his face. I said, the mob. Everybody jumped up. Objection, 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 objection. It was pandemonium.
That's a good one.
Oh gosh, I got I have a picture here of the just before that actually took place. If I can figure out how to share my screen with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll
I
try
can
it.
show you what that picture looks like. I'm not. It may take me a few minutes, so we just keep talking.
That's all right,
Okay.
But,
He's the boss of the mob.
Well, that was a
The
pretty
boss of the
dramatic,
mob.
dramatic trial moment there. You don't
Oh,
usually those
boy.
trials are just boring, minutia, detail, asking the same questions over and over again. After you
Oh,
want to go to
yeah.
sleep, and then you get something like that, something good.
Well, and that was so wonderful. I mean, I just wish that I
Oh, my
could
God.
recorded that moment for you. But all of the high dollar mob defense attorneys in Chicago have never moved so fast in their lives. It was so amazing the way that they all jumped up, and it was pandemonium. And of course, everyone in the crowd was talking, and oh my gosh, I wish that I could have had the transcript, but it wouldn't have captured it really. It was just
Yeah.
it was just unbelievable. So it was a real scary moment for everybody. What's going to happen next? We don't know. But the judge ultimately ruled it wasn't prejudicial. The jurors weren't stupid. They knew
Yeah.
what we're talking about was
Yeah.
organized crime.
Had no idea before he said it.
No, it wouldn't have. Everyone's name ended in a vowel, you know. And so we moved on to the next part, and that was actually for me was a highlight of the trial. Lenny Patrick's testimony was wonderful, and he was an amazing and scary individual for sure. But even more interesting was they had, after Lenny Patrick, they had wiretaps of the collections that actually this crew would go on. And one of these poor bastards that owed money to the crew, they sent a guy by the name of Tony the Hatchet Chiaramonte to collect from him. And they wired the guy up. And I got to give the guy credit. He had the courage to do it. They went into a restaurant. The Hatchet grabbed him and took him back into the kitchen. The guy's on a live wire. The FBI is listening. And the Hatchet grabbed this guy by the throat, lifted him and set him on a hot griddle.
No.
And started stabbing him with a fork, telling him that he wanted his money and he wanted it right now. And the guy's screaming and saying, "Don't choke me. Don't stab me with this." He said, "I want my money. You'll have it by 5 o'clock," and lots of real colorful epithets.
Yes.
You know, you
Sure.
can imagine.
Yes,
And-
lots
and,
of F-bombs.
Oh boy. And you know, this guy, this Hatchet sitting 10 feet away from me. And I thought, boy, I'm glad that he's polite to me every day in court, because I'll tell you what, that's a pretty ruthless thing. And the FBI, Gary, is so funny. The FBI didn't interrupt. They were building a case. They weren't going to come in and interrupt.
Oh, shit.
So they just let this guy get his backside scorched and have a bunch of holes poked in him with a fork, because it would make good evidence.
That's some cold agents there.
Oh man. The jury, you could see they were starting to squirm and move around in their chair, you know, shift in their seat.
Yeah, really.
They were just getting so uncomfortable. That was where everything kind of shifted right there.
You know, it's funny. There's a couple instances of that. The guy who would eventually kill Tony the Hatch, Tony Calabrese, another guy wore a wire on him, and they let him go in there wearing a wire as Tony Calabrese beat the hell out of this guy, made him strip down. He didn't find the wire. And Tony Calabrese, the guy who killed Tony the Hatch, is also caught on wire, beating the hell out of somebody.
Karma.
World of unusual coincidences. That Tony Calabrese, didn't he just die or something?
Yeah, he sure did.
He asked for a presidential pardon and he didn't get it. He had to answer.
He did not get it,
He
unfortunately.
did not
but-
get it.
But it was interesting how he was foist upon his own petard, as they say in French. You know, the
That's a
same
good
thing
one.
that happened to Tony the Hatchet happened to Tough Tony, his killer.
Yeah,
Live by the sword, right?
yeah,
That's
true.
right.
That is true. Happened to more than one.
It really did. So,
Oh,
you know, Lenny Patrick was extremely dangerous, beady-eyed, cold, ice cold. Not one of these mobsters that had a gregarious, friendly side. Sam Carlisi and Gus Alex were both extremely courteous. Both of them you could have a conversation with. You could see them as fathers and grandfathers, as well as businessmen, but not Lenny Patrick. The guy was ice cold and frightening, and just being around him was uncomfortable. I don't know if you've ever been around someone like that.
I have. It's scary. I know. They look at you. They don't really look at you. They look through you. And it's like you're a bug that if they needed to squash you, they would squash you and just move on and not even think twice. I know. They got these soulless eyes.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Gary. It's just, he was like that. So was Tony the Hatchet, and so was little Jimmy Marcello. Just terrifying guys. That it was uncomfortable, really, to sit in the courtroom with them. Where Carlisi, you could sit and have a beer with a guy and have a good conversation. Gus Alex would probably scotch, you know, but very, very genial guys. And you can see why they had the political connections that the mob needed, because certainly if they depended on the ability of Tony the Hatchet or Lenny Patrick to make political connections, they were getting nowhere fast.
right.
Of course, that wasn't Lenny Patrick's role.
Yeah.
Right.
That is interesting. The division of labor in a mob family like that, and the types of personalities that occupy those different positions. You know, you got the more genial, hail fellow, well met type that needs to butter up the politicians and slip them a little money and not be too threatening, because the politicians will just run the other way. And then you got the guys like Lenny Patrick out there when you need some money collected or need somebody intimidated. So it's there's room for everybody.
It's structured like corporation.
Yeah.
You know what the amazing thing about Lenny Patrick is that when he was about to testify, the attorneys for Carlisi, who I would eventually go to work for after I was done with the federal government, they filed a motion to bar Lenny Patrick from testifying. And when that came across my desk, I was fascinated, because that motion had with it a videotape, a documentary produced by Cuban TV, which you have to question the
Veracity.
source right there, but a documentary that named Lenny Patrick as the gunman from the grassy knoll who shot John F. Kennedy.
I'll be damned.
So
I'll be damned.
I'd never heard that before in my life, and I'd been a little bit of a student of the Kennedy assassination.
That's the third outfit guy named as the gunman, right? That'd be the
Yeah.
third guy, 'cause
Marshall Cafano was named.
Yeah.
I've heard Roselli, and I've heard Kane, who everybody knows, but Cafano
Richard
now.
Kane
Okay, so that's
and
four.
Cafano,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
That's four. Well, Marshall Cafano told Red Wemette that he was there.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I don't know. I don't know what that's worth. It's
Yeah.
it's up there with Cuban TV.
yeah, my money's on Richard Kane.
Yeah, well, it was very interesting because the response of the federal government was, Judge, this is nonsense, and here's how we're going to prove it to you. We're going to bring you all the sealed Kennedy assassination files. You can read through them, and if you see anything in there at all that implicates Lenny Patrick, we can discuss it. So guess who got the assignment of reading all those sealed files?
It'd be kind of fun if you're just doing it for fun, but when you had to do it for work and you got to really go through it, that would be boring.
It's like putting Oliver Stone's JFK on repeat for 36 hours.
Yeah, it was a long weekend, and then some.
At least they weren't redacted, were they? You didn't have all that redaction to go over.
No, nothing like that. I wasn't. And then Black called Black.
Yeah.
No, nothing like that.
That
So
really
who-
makes
who-
it boring.
Who really did it, Paul?
Yeah,
Well,
we
here's
really
what
did
I'm
it.
going to tell you. And after that, Camillus, I have to kill you. But I know it'll be satisfying. The funny thing really is about it, I can't say what was in those files, but I can tell you that there was nothing in there that I hadn't read somewhere else.
Somewhere in the newspapers, yeah.
Yeah, it's the government's obsession with secrecy that fuels these things. I have never had access to any secret files before. I just read the books that you and I pick up at the airport or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in there that shocked me at all. And obviously, the judge allowed Lenny Patrick to testify and did not allow the defense to argue that he had killed JFK. So you can draw your own conclusions from that.
It was creative. You ever pulled that one out in court, Paul?
I've tried a couple times.
The he killed JFK defense.
That's right. He took the Lindbergh baby defense, you know.
Cheers.
Sometimes you just have to throw in the kitchen sink.
That's right.
Really.
So that was a great moment. And Lenny Patrick, the funny thing about it is, if someone said that about you, Camillus, if I said, Judge, Camillus Robinson shot JFK, what would your reaction be?
I would just, I don't know how I would respond. I would just,
It'd be like a deer in the
ridiculous.
headlights, huh?
Right. You would. The
It's
point
just
is, you would have
ridiculous.
some reaction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lenny Patrick was a sheet of ice.
really.
There was absolutely no reaction in his face whatsoever. It didn't stun him, didn't bother him. He didn't think it was funny. No reaction
shit.
at all. Just like ice. And that was his demeanor. He had that kind of a deer in the headlights look, but a very, very dangerous, like a deer with 12-inch claws. And didn't bother him one bit, and he got zero reaction.
Yeah. I've seen some of the pictures you post of him, and it is like y'all say. I mean, he just got those dead eyes, and he looks. He doesn't look. He looks like just like an old guy. But then you look at his face, and he's just like, there's that glare.
Yeah.
It's kind of like kind of like Carmine Galante. He just looks like sort of an old grandfatherly until you get up between the nose and the forehead, and it's just like, oh Jesus.
Yeah, there's no soul there.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hate to judge somebody's soul, but as far as I can tell,
Sometimes they're asking for it.
right. Sometimes you're right.
I mean, I don't wear my soul judgment on my sleeve, but some people do.
After the 6th or 7th murder, at some point, it gets tiresome.
Yeah, really.
There was this story about him that I read. So there was this father and son, this family-owned pizza place, and this kid stops. Lenny's car is stuck in the road or something, maybe in the snow. And Paul, you can correct me if I get it wrong. So this kid stops to help push Lenny's car. Lenny notices that the kid works for the pizza place, and they get to talking. Lenny says, "Here, let me give you $5 for pushing my car." The kid's like, "No, I'm happy to do it." So Lenny looks at the kid driving off. He's like, well, hell, if he's got plenty of money and he owns his business. So Lenny takes it upon himself to go and extort their business. He extorts the family.
Yeah. It's an opportunity for him.
Kid doesn't want my money. I'll sure as hell take his.
Well, that's who we're talking about. I mean, you've probably all heard the story about Eupa and how some poor teenage kid pushed a cart into his car at Dominic's.
No, I didn't heard that one.
Yeah, he had the kid's legs broken.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, that's who we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And Lenny
bad.
Patrick was every bit as bloodthirsty in that story, Camillus. That sounds exactly like Lenny Patrick. It's all about what can you do for Lenny Patrick.
Yeah. I mean, it's really unpleasant guy.
Oh, horrible man. And I was in a courtroom full. First of all, we had the 8 or 9 defendants and all the hangers on and the family and everything. And Lenny Patrick stood out as just plain the worst guy there, even compared to Tony the Hatchet, whose nickname alone says enough. I mean, the guy put a man on a hot fry griddle.
On tape.
But Patrick was scarier.
And I think what Paul, and you've spoken to this, and I think it definitely makes your point, is like this was a lot of people, like we said, look to family secrets because that was the first made guy. But in this trial, from because of Lenny Patrick, you lose the brains of the outfit. Then you lose the boss of the outfit. You lose the underboss, and because of the division of power, you had Carlisi and Marcello, but then on the other side, the sort of the official underboss, you had Ferriola, the street boss Ferriola, and his guy Infelice, and they both get knocked out in separate instances. Infelice did anyway.
Yep.
But so this was the entire upper echelon of the outfit basically taken out in one swipe. And the outfit after that, it was no longer a single sort of a semi-pyramid organization. That was it. There was, after Carlisi, there was no central boss. I mean, after him, the individual who took over was like, well, we're going to do our own separate thing, and we're not going to be a single organization. I mean, that was, as I understood it, right, Paul?
Camillus, you can't state that strongly enough. I don't think people understand that as well. I think you put it about as well as anybody could, that you took out Gus Alex, which was all the political connections. You took out Carlisi, who had some of those connections that went all the way back to the 60s. And he learned at Aupa's feet, who went back, of course, to the late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
You took him out. So you took out the boss, the connection guy, the driver and chauffeur for the boss, and Marcello, and an entire street crew, the Cicero street crew, which was at that time the dominant street crew in the outfit. Another thing we don't think about is Lenny Patrick's crew was wiped out by this. So you got two crews going down: the boss, the connection guy, and Marcello. So it was devastating. And after that, like Camillus pointed out, you had the successor to Sam Carlisi, who somehow avoided getting indicted in this trial and did very minor time in the Rincon case. And he pretty much shut down his street crew and decentralized the outfit so that street crews no longer even had to do with each other. So this was really the end of the outfit that Al Capone created. Was 1986 and 1991, 1992, and Gus Alex and Sam Carlisi, end of story.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Family Secrets was a bunch of was a lot of remnants, but you notice it it was old activity for the most part. It was guys who had just gotten out of prison. Because think again what was going on in 92. You've got the guys who are still in prison from Strawman. You've got the entire first ward is gone from Gambat and Grey Lord. So I mean they and losing Gussie Alex. So that's it, period. You've got everybody's already in prison. Guys like Joey Lombardo are in prison, and Rocco Infelice goes to prison, and that's it. When Ferriola died later than that, but it's gone. Cardo just died as an old man who wasn't in any part active at all. But in the past he would step in and pinch hit, even as he was retired. But at that point he was no longer a factor. So like Paul said, you've still got your street crews, and we're not saying that there's no mob-ish street crime, but it's not a single cohesive unit to meet together and have a single boss. Not like it was.
That's absolutely right. And Lenny Patrick is the one to take the credit or the blame, however you look at it, for that. Much more significantly than what Nick Calabrese did. And I mean, Family Secrets, you took down a boss who was little Jimmy Marcello, who had already been taken out in the Carlisi trial, and he was presiding over a very divided, weakened outfit.
I think what Family Secrets did is it solved a lot of murders, and it really gave a lot of people a lot of peace. And I think that beyond what we know about, I think there's probably a lot more information behind the scenes that I think that Family Secrets probably closed a lot more books for the FBI than we're even aware of. That's a feeling, because I'm sure Nick Calabrese knew a lot more than what pertained to that trial, and the FBI was able to close a lot of case files. So I think that trial did let them say, okay, we've gotten rid of a lot of the leadership. Here's a lot of the murders. They let them sort of clean up a lot of the remainder. I don't mean, not to take anything away. Family Secrets was what it was, but as far as the leadership was already, I think that when you think of the commission trial in New York, this Fear City that just came out on that is more akin to taking out the Carlisi Marcello and Gussie Alex. That would be more akin to the commission trial in New York than Family Secrets was.
Really interesting. Well, it's all changed, and there's still a little bit going on here in Kansas City, but not very much at all. Some of the old guys still meet. I know I've got word that they meet at this one restaurant and talk. I don't really know what's going. I don't try to find out what's going on, but they're
They want to
still
do a show.
They have to do a show. Yeah, really. I know that there was a guy that was going to go in some business, into fireworks business and another guy came to him and said, let's, come on, let's do this together. And he said, well, what do you mean? He said, let's do this together. You got some land that we can use, and I got the fireworks. I got the connections, go get the fireworks. And he said, but we've got to kick 25% up. And my friend says, oh no, So they're still operating. This was just this last year. They're still operating, but it's on a much reduced basis. I can assure you that. And losing all that political power like they did in Chicago, that was the main thing. Paul, I think in this case here was after Greylord and Gambat. They already were really hurting them. But boy, when they took this guy out, that had to be the final straw that broke the camel's back. And the mob cans. I said earlier, you cannot operate without political connections. You just can't do it.
Without that, you're basically a street gang.
Yeah.
And that's largely what the outfit is today. I think is a street gang. The sophisticated leaders have made so much money legitimately now.
Yes.
Why in the world would they take the risk? So you got the young guys that are basically gangbangers.
Yeah, robbing drug dealers and stuff like that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing in Kansas City. Robbing bookies.
Yep.
Somebody they know has a lot of cash money, they go rob them. They killed one here a few years ago, and I know they killed several drug dealers in the process. This one, they just walked in and just shot him, took his money and walked out. They got away with it, but it was amazing that. They're cold. The young guys are cold, but I don't think they'll ever graduate beyond that kind of crime anymore because they just that era is gone. Everything
just
changed.
Right. And Camillus and I have talked about this. I think it's very legitimate to say that Sam Carlisi was the last boss of the outfit.
Yeah.
As we knew it from Capone on.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, Paul and Cam, this has been great. And Paul, you got any last words?
It's been a real pleasure talking with you guys. I enjoyed learning from you, laughing with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, we like to make the mob fun. If nothing else, we make it fun.
Tony the Hatchet.
Really. Quick little story about that. I was working dog watch, and the desk sergeant, and this officer comes in. He's telling about this horrible domestic violence thing that he had just brought I think the husband in on, and the wife was all beat up. And he just kind of looks off into space, and there's a song, and he says, "You make loving fun." You got to have that gallows humor, man.
Oh yeah, how you get through the job.
All right. Good night, Paul. Good night.
All right, Joe.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.